Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to thank you for attending our webinar with Baicells. My name is Ashley Guzik, and I am the Marketing Coordinator with WAV. WAV Inc. and MBSI WAV are distributors of equipment and services that make the Internet work. We've been a partner to value-added resellers, MSPs, and WISPs, and manufacturers for almost 3 decades. We believe in delivering quality equipment when you need it, where you need it, and how you need it. Servicing partners with 4 warehouses across the United States and 2 in Canada. Our tech-savvy Geek Squad of engineers are dedicated to offering you the best when it comes to FCC coordination, heat mapping, multi-vendor expertise, technical support, and beyond. Our creative financing and leasing options enable you to focus on getting the job done. WAV and MBSI WAV support you from planning to deploying and everything in between, because together we make the Internet work. I'm going to turn over the webinar to Cameron Kilton. He's the Director of Engineering Services with Baicells.
Good morning to everyone. How's everybody doing today? One thing I would like to say is I kind of run a pretty loose webinar in the sense I'd like to see as many questions as possible, and I'd like you to utilize your chat window to do that. I'll keep an eye on that as we go through the slides. So if you have questions that kind of come up as I'm talking, feel free to pop a question in there, and I'll do my best to answer it if it pertains at that particular moment. And at the very end, we'll kind of have a brief Q&A and go over just some generic questions, kind of where we're headed, maybe talk about the roadmap a little bit and features that you would like to see that you don't know of now, etc. and so forth. So with that, I'll get started. So my name is Cameron Kilton. I'm the Director of Engineering Services here at Baicells. I'm primarily responsible for Tier 2 markets, OEMs, etc. and so forth, and it relates to that, as well as any engineering requests. I see a couple of attendees on here today that I've done some mapping for as part of that, and you'll see me do a lot in that regard. I have a heavy hand when it comes to antenna selection and design and how to properly RF plan your network to make sure it's best performing for you and your customers. Ultimately, the idea is coverage and capacity and marrying those 2 components together. So we're going to talk about 2 products today. I'm sure there's going to be some additional questions on some other products. We're going to focus on the Nova 227, which is our new outdoor PoE powered 2x 250 milliwatt base station, and our Nova 436, which is a new 4-port base station, which is also going to support carrier aggregation and split mode in a single base station, and we'll talk about that as well. So with that said, we'll kind of jump right into the Nova 227. So for those, I wish I could go live video, but some of these may have joined my webinar a couple weeks ago. For this particular one, the video system's not working quite right, so I will talk about the product, and we'll have some different pictures in here, and we'll review it. It's an all-encompass unit. It's about, I'd say, 10 inches or so across, or 10 inches square, maybe 3.5, 4 inches deep. It's a very lightweight unit. It's a very low power unit by comparison. It is PoE plus compliant, so for those operating certain PoE switches, as long as it's 802.3 AT compliant, it will power this base station. With 48 volt system. That's a PoE plus. We have a lot of people that using them with Nictonics, Dell switches, HP switches, Ubiquity switches even, and there's a plethora of switches that we know they work with, and I personally tested a handful. What we're also seeing the kind of target market for this is pocket fills. It's kind of bringing LTE to the micro pop. And what we've been seeing a lot of in market trends, and I've seen personally as an operator, is delivering LTE to a pocket of maybe 10 or 15 users is not necessarily cost effective. However, maintaining another technology also isn't very cost effective in the sense of multiple platforms to look at, carrying much more inventory on installation vehicles. So by simplifying and delivering a kind of a Pico cell to fill in these pockets, you're able to continue to stock one modem. It'll work both on a macro that you're using today, and it will work on these Picos that you also could be using. And they'll be interchangeable across your network, simplifying technician installation time, Provisioning for your network becomes much simpler because it's across every device instead of having to select SSIDs potentially in a different kind of micropot scenario. It just simplifies your overall experience. So this kind of touches in on the form factor. It looks like I was about 10 inches square, and you get 3.2 inches in depth. It's got some weight to it. It's 4.5 pounds, but it's very sturdy. It's got a pretty solid mount that comes with it. All the LEDs that you can see on the side. The depiction here looks like it's a glass side door. However, I tell you, it's just we've removed the hinge. It is a metal or aluminum rather enclosed side door with 2 captive screws to lock everything down. It's a single Ethernet jack in there, as well as just a single spot for the cable itself to go up into the radio. So common, it says PoE and wall mount. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and explain to you guys how to mount your radios. Chances are you've spent a good deal of time doing so. It's very flexible though, so I do want to point out, because of its size, you can put this in some very discrete locations. It does have a built-in 65-degree antenna, which is a pretty good coverage ring. It really covers about 90 degrees with a 3 dB roll-off. So at 65 degrees true beam, you're looking at 13 dB. At 90 degrees, you're going to be about 10 dB on the antenna gain. And that will continue to provide some pretty decent coverage. So it's pretty optimal for a small neighborhood. We referenced in many of our documentations, trailer park locations, small construction, I forget the associations, things like that, where you're trying to cover just a small pocket of homes, so having to invest many thousands of dollars to get in LTE equipment into the location, as well as antennas and all that. This really simplifies the coverage while still kind of meeting potential homeowners association requirements for antennas, and really keeping the footprint really small. Built-in GPS sync on the top of it. There's a very small GPS antenna at the top of the radio, so everything will continue to be GPS timed, just like one of our bigger base stations. You can see, I kind of jump down to the antenna beam width, like I mentioned, 65 degrees on the horizontal, 20 degrees on the vertical. The front to back ratio right now is, I say it's 25 dBm, but that's just the patch. And I look for an updated specification sheet, because that patch antenna front to back ratio was also not accounted for when it was mounted in the metal enclosure. So we expect the front to back ratio to be closer to 33 to 34 dBm, which is a very good front to back ratio. Any questions so far on this product? I don't see anything in the chat window, so that's pretty good. As far as configuration, if you're familiar with our existing 1-watt base station that you've been using today, is long known as the Nova R9 1-watt, which has been replaced by its new name, the Nova 233, which I'll get into why a little bit later. But it's the same exact web interface. The configuration feels the same. It's the same software. And long story short, it's just a lower power radio. This is some generic conversation pieces about this. This does support the software that we're going to be going, and you'll hear it, I guess, first. It will be going GA towards the end of this week, which officially unlocks the 96 user support, and at a general availability firmware. It has been in beta for quite some time, and we are comfortable enough to release that very soon. Supports standard LTE services like voice over LTE for those that are doing SIP. And if you have a local EPC that you happen to be using, if you're not using our cloud core, that will be able to do different QCIs between 1 to 9. And a QCI, for those that are unaware, is essentially your QoS flagging systems for LTE. Coming soon as part of the software, you're going to start seeing what has been a big topic of discussion is auto PCI planning and automatic neighbor relation. So we'll be able to, or recognition rather, we'll be able to plan the neighbor list automatically and PCI automatically. The only thing we won't be doing is frequency right away, but that will be coming. What this affords you the ability to do is services such as X2, which is a fancy way of saying seamless handoff. And there's a technology that lives behind that. So if you do have a fixed / mobile environment, or even just a fixed environment, and you have a customer that may be sitting between two cells, this will allow the traffic to hand off from cell to cell without losing any data. And that will be a good function of having all this automatic neighbor recognition as well as the PCI plan in place, part of our SON. And this is coming to all of our base stations across our platform. All right, so this is the operating temperature. Obviously, we're IP66 compliant here, and with this particular product, I know -40 Celsius for our Canadian friends that are watching may still not cover you guys, but that's really from a cold startup. If it's up and running and everything's working fine, it'll certainly continue to work that way. We have tested it in certain scenarios. I haven't yet seen, or at least where I am, in northern Maine, I have not seen temperatures this cold yet, so I won't personally comment on it, but once we get to that -25, 30 range, I'll be sure to provide my comments on it. All right, so that's really it for the Nova 227. I want to pause here for a minute for anybody that may have any questions about it. I'll give it just a moment so you guys can pop some things into the chat window. I strongly encourage questions, and I will address them as they come up. It's a very exciting product, and it's kind of to recap. It lowers the barrier of entry even further for those looking to get into LTE, and for those who are already in it, it helps you expand into areas where you didn't previously think that it was an affordable option. Because of this product and the costing, at least where it's at, it really helps get your ROI quick, and still maintaining some of that systematic cleanness of your installations as well as your management. Not seeing any questions, so in that case I will move into the 436. So I'd usually expect several questions of this one because it's a pretty exciting product. Oh,
Cameron?
Yeah.
In the questions box there is one.
Okay, where's let me figure
it says, "Morning, Cameron.
Yeah,
curious if you have received feedback from the initial batch of orders distribution shipped out the last couple of weeks."
Yes, let me see if I can expand that because it's not very easy to read. I haven't seen a whole lot of feedback in the last couple of weeks. That is a good question. So they've recently shipped. It's all new to the North American market. However, we have been using these particular units for some time. And mind you, I've had the one that I've been testing under FCC test license for several months. And I'll give you just kind of a brief test example of what I've been doing. So I have one of these mounted in the most prime optimal location in my laundry room. And it happens to be shooting out a wall, and I can get down, and I'll kind of lay out my area, which is about a quarter mile away, which is dense pine, fir trees, and kind of combination, some oaks in there as well. And I can maintain about a -103 RSRP with a SINR of about 25. And that's not very optimal installation. Is this thing going to cover 1, 2, 3, 4 miles? Probably not. It can. Its chipset limitation currently is 14.4 kilometers, so you can cover quite a distance. However, that'd probably be a line of sight kind of coverage. From a non-line of sight perspective, you can expect sub 2 miles, in my opinion. In many cases, probably sub 1 mile. So as long as you plan accordingly, you know, physics is still physics at the end of the day. This thing is not going to burn through trees. I don't see any other questions so far. Okay, moving on. 436. All right, so this one's a very exciting product I've been pushing for since I came to Baicells last February. Was a carrier aggregation device. It is really kind of where the market's headed. It's helping us increase throughput to our customers, allowing us to either add capacity or and generally speaking, just sell higher service plans at a higher revenue. So it's a very exciting product in that regard. It also lowers the barrier of entry even more so, in the sense that this is a lesser cost to buy one of these, which could replace 2 base stations that exist today, the Nova 233, because you can run it in split mode. And by running it in split mode, it could give you potentially 4-sector coverage with 2 radios. So that's a very positive way of looking at it. If you're looking to get into LTE with maximum coverage right away, buying 2 of these radios versus buying 4 1-watt base stations makes a great deal of sense, because it also allows you to then grow into 2 more base stations once the capacity is needed. So you could have the way each carrier works, you can carrier aggregate between 20 megahertz and a 10 megahertz, 2 20s, 2 10s. The combination is really up to you. And carrier aggregation is one of my favorite things about LTE when I first started getting into LTE about 6 years ago, is it really takes the performance that you would get out of a typical 40 megahertz channel in Wi-Fi based solutions. But by cutting it in half and do it in 220s, you get the 20 megahertz receive sensitivity that with 40 megahertz channel performance. So you gain 3 dB of receive sensitivity. And the same can be said if you do 10 megahertz channels and you only need a 20 megahertz of performance, you're going to get 10 megahertz sensitivity. So it gives you another 3 dB of sensitivity on your radio. So it's very neat, and one of my favorite features of LTE when it comes to adding the CA component is getting that essentially same performance that you'd get out of a much larger channel, but by splitting it in half, you're going to get that receive sensitivity so you don't lose the coverage. Okay. All right, so backhaul, this is no different than any of the radios that you may be familiar with today. You just need to provide backhaul to it. What we have added to this product line, and much like we've added to our Generation 2 1-watt, which will be coming out similar time frame, is this does have an SFP slot, so our SFP cage. So you can put a multi-mode or single-mode SFP. The idea is also to be able to support PON modules. So if you had a GPON network that you had today and you want to do fiber right into the small cell, you'd be able to do so, and eliminating the need for having a site router. You'd be able to do it all through VLAN. There's a number of different ways you can configure that. Obviously, we're trying to provide as many options as possible because we know not every operator kind of sees their network the same way. Some people want a layer 2, some people do everything with layer 3 at every site. A lot of VLANs, MPLS, etc. So we want to be able to provide as much flexibility as possible. So one thing we did different from the design perspective is you'll see there's 4 antenna ports. No, this is not a 4x4 radio. The next question I typically get, is it software upgradable to 4x4? No, it is not. This is essentially 2 2x2s, and when aggregated, you have a 4-port antenna, but it will carrier aggregate those 2x2 channels together. What this also allows to do, and the reason we did it this way because of high demand, is you can do 2 2x2 antennas in 2 different directions, say east and a west, or north and a south, whatever kind of configuration you deem appropriate, and you can use just 2 radios like I mentioned earlier and get 4-sector coverage, and really get into a site for a lot lesser money than you would be today. This also allows, when you do 2x2, it's 96 current users per carrier. So if you had a 2x2 antenna facing north, you could get 96 on that. You had another 2x2 coming off heading south, you'd be able to get 96 on that. However, when you aggregate those 2 channels together, it's still just 96 users. You don't get to double it and go to 192, for example. The weight of this, if you guys are familiar, if anybody has our 1-watt today, it's not entirely much larger. It's actually quite power efficient. I'll get to the specification sheets here shortly on that. But it is a similar weight. The mounting is much simpler. We've cleaned up the ports on the bottom comparison to other. We still have the side door, essentially on all new products now, to eliminate a lot of the weatherproofing concerns and how difficult that kind of was on our first generation product. So this goes into obviously the form factor a little bit more. We tried to kind of lay out, so your dimensions are not very large. we're talking 12 inches in height, 8.3 inches wide, and 3.7 inches deep at a weight of about 13 pounds. By comparison, this is nearly half the weight of some of our competition for a similar product. One thing I'll point out on the bottom, and one thing you can start seeing on a lot of our product, is just about every screw, if not every screw, is captive. So you can see on the bottom right picture here, there's 2 screws. That's the grounding lugs. If you take those screws out, they stay there. There's a little a captive container to keep these screws from falling out if you're mounting a ground system on a tower, etc. and so forth, to really keep it easy. And they're also got a hex head, not just a Phillips, so you can torque it down with a wrench. So we're trying to think as well, at least I know I am personally, from an installation standpoint, having installed an awful lot of these radios myself, I want it to be very clean and easy to handle. Oop. I think I just went not full screen. Let's try that again. So you can see in the side door here, again, there's at the very top, as I will reference when you look at, is the SFP cage. Then the next one down is a typical electrical copper connection. Then down below that is the power connection. And it's a little connector that kind of comes out that you wire your wires ahead of time, and you just plug it in when you're ready to go. And again, there's a side door to secure everything. So this, just like our other radios, all the specifications are essentially the same. The software configuration is going to look the same, still GPS time. This does support band 42, 43, and will support band 48 CBRS once fully rectified. And all the other fittings you see here. Power consumption is showing here about 85 watts. I can tell you with absolute certainty it's not that high, and we'll probably refine this spec sheet a little bit more. It's closer to 60 watts. So it's very power efficient, which is something I take very serious as well. Having worked with base stations that take as much as 500 watts per radio and have to have 3 of those on a site, keeping the power draw low is very important to me, because one thing we want to keep eye out is not just the fact that you have an inexpensive hardware to give LTE, but your operational expenses shouldn't be high either. You shouldn't be paying, I know in the sites, for example, I just referenced with 500-watt base stations with their all the other fixings that went on a site, you're talking a power bill is about $120 a month US, which is astronomical in my opinion for 3 radios. And it's in a small router, which obviously was only 30 watts draw. So being able to deliver this kind of performance at a lower power is very, very important to me, so we don't take up too much OpEx. So moving on. So like I said, I talked about earlier, it's 96 user support. This is a 3GPP Release 12 product. So for those who have our 1 watt product today, that's a Release 9. Innova 227 is a Release 9 and 10. 10 comes from some of the software that we're going to be releasing. We'll also see, and I'll talk about towards the end here, kind of the UE that's going to be needed to support it. But one of the more common questions that we have is, do the subscriber radios that I have today, whether they're Cat 3, Cat 4, work with this base station? Yes, they do. One thing to know is Cat 3, Cat 4, and even Cat 5, or Cat 4 Plus, as a couple other variants, they do not work with carrier aggregation. So what that means, though, is if you run your base station in carrier aggregation mode, which means 2 10s or 2 20s or whatever combination you like, the subscriber radios that are not Cat 6 or higher, to take advantage of that, will just load balance, and that's something that you'll be able to set as kind of a trigger on your base station. You can, there's a number of ways to do it. There's by traffic, there's by user count. I prefer traffic because to me that's the most important. Is say you have 50 users on a base station and 10 of them are using 60 megabit, but the other 40 are only using 10. It'll balance those users across each individual 20 megahertz channel until they're kind of running parallel with each other. And that helps bring your cell capacity up. So even though they may not have carrier aggregation support in their modem or UE, they will bring the aggregate of your base station capacity much higher because it's balancing across those carriers. I will leave it there just for a second, though. For those who, if you get a Cat 6 UE, which we will have soon, the date to be determined, what you'll be able to do is that we'll be able to aggregate the two channels together and essentially double your throughput. So if you're using a 20 megahertz channel today and you're seeing 80, 90 megabit out of a single connection, you would essentially be able to double that. The net aggregate throughput, so the base station's actually capable of 224 megabits downlink, which is a pretty good capacity. Obviously, that's using up 40 megahertz of overall spectrum. Also, I'll point out from a CA perspective is we have the ability to do non-contiguous channels with carrier aggregation, which is very, very important for those playing around in the CBRS band and other 3 gigahertz bands. Is you may not be fortunate enough to have 40 megahertz of contiguous spectrum that's clean, or in this case, that won't have a PAL assigned to it when it comes to the CBRS rules. So you'll have the ability to take, say, 10 megahertz from 3560 and another 10 megahertz from 3660, and they'll be able to aggregate together. Typical CA systems have to have contiguous channels to be able to aggregate that. So you'd have to go, for example, on a 20 megahertz channel, you'd have to use today 3660 and 3680. That'd be something that you have to use to aggregate together. But we don't do that. So we do have the ability to do whatever channel combination that you see appropriate based on the RF conditions that surround you. I'm looking, do I have any more questions? Oh yeah, okay. Operating temperature very similar to the last product that I showed, the 227. So not much there. A lot of people have asked, is this a negative 48 or a positive 48 system? We actually have all of our systems have a floating ground. So you can configure it on a negative 48 plant or a positive 48 plant. It's entirely up to you. I recommend negative 48. All right, so that kind of concludes the product descriptions to date and what we have. I do wish I could get kind of hands-on and show you. I don't have the 436, but I do have the new generation 1 watt and the 227 here. But I can, if you haven't seen it and you want to kind of get handsy with it, do check out our Baicells webinar, which I believe is up on our YouTube channel that I did a couple weeks ago, and I kind of show and get hands-on, so you get a kind of a look and feel of dimensions. With that said, I certainly welcome any questions at this point, whether it's what we have going on with these products or any other things that would be relative to Baicells, its future, what we're doing, and other cool things. I will do my best to answer those questions that may or may not get me in trouble.
All right, well, if nobody has any questions, we will have this available for viewing afterwards. So we will follow up with an email, and obviously please feel free to reach out to your WAV MBSI WAV rep if you have any questions. Thank you everyone for your time this morning.